Hey everyone, welcome back to the It's a Mind Game podcast. My name is Jade, and today I'm so excited to be welcoming back the wonderful Jacqueline Byrne. I feel like we cover such an array of different topics when it comes to eating disorder recovery. And today we're going to dive straight in because we thought we would talk about sabotaging behaviours. So, first of all, welcome back, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much for having me back, Jade. It's always a delight to be here, and I couldn't agree more. Our conversations are something I always enjoy, and we always go to interesting places. I'm very much looking forward to doing that again today.
I'm so excited, especially because sabotaging behaviors can be sneaky ones, because there's some part of our, consciousness that might be aware, and there's other parts that it could really be in a blind spot. So I guess to start it off, could you perhaps define sort of what makes a sabotaging behavior a sabotaging behavior?
A very important question, and sneaky is a good word. I like that word that you've used because it does feel it's really in that glitch between consciousness and unconsciousness. And you could even say something like an eating disorder perhaps could be framed as a self-sabotaging behavior as an extreme in itself. But it's essentially where there is behavior playing out without that person's conscious consent that's to the detriment of their intention. So say if somebody is hoping to progress in their career and they have particular goals they're trying to meet, and they understand what's required of them to pursue those goals, but they involuntarily find themselves engaging in behaviors that are to the detriment of that. And it can be incredibly frustrating because we're witnessing ourselves doing the sabotaging behavior and making the things that we think we desire so much harder to attain, but also not necessarily having the skills or knowledge as to why this is happening and how to change that pattern. So we can be stuck in that, just almost just trying to use willpower to not do it again, but it will usually keep happening until we understand it in more depth.
Yeah, I'd like to dive into that, because that idea that willpower will fix it, it almost seems like such a short-term cure, almost like a 24, 48, and then it kind of wears off. I guess let's go into maybe the two top sabotaging behaviors that you see within eating disorder recovery, and then we can sort of weave our way around to how they present themselves and how to not let them sneak in, sort of, as you said, without our consent.
There are two that really stand out to me, and they're almost opposite sides of the same coin, you could say, which is probably why they go hand in hand. One is in people's boundaries. I see a lot of self-sabotage in struggling to create and upkeep boundaries, which could have a subheading of being afraid of losing what we have. And then I see a lot of sabotage in people's prevention of their own power, prevention of their own responsibility, which might be a subheading of fear of shining our light. So on one end of the spectrum, we're scared of letting something go, and on the other end of the spectrum, we're scared of reaching for something that could be ours and the change that comes with that.
Beautiful description of both of them, because I feel, especially if we were to lay that into the HA recovery world, it's that idea that you need to create, sorry, my throat's gone all cracky, the changes that you need to create in order to restore your period, because perhaps it's that identity of a mother that you're seeking. And despite having that knowledge that that is what you want to pursue, there's that fear of losing everything you have in your worldview now in order to strive for something that you truly want. And a big fear is, well, maybe I'm just not meant to be a mum. Maybe I can't do it. Maybe this is God or the universe's way of saying, like, no, maybe sport is for you, or maybe just eating this way is for you. Like, that's who you're meant to be. And I guess that sort of like glitch you mentioned earlier can be quite destructive to the process, because they both feed each other. It's like you need the belief in yourself or in your future in order to hold the boundaries required, but you also need the boundaries in order to achieve that future self that you're wanting to experience and create.
Exactly. And it's the willingness to lose the short-term benefits of what the compromised boundaries provide us. Because if we're people pleasing, if we're compliant, if we're getting rewarded for those tendencies, to set boundaries usually feels incredibly uncomfortable and even impossible. Something I hear a lot is people saying something along the lines of, but if I don't do it, no one will. And so setting a boundary sounds great in theory, but if I'm not the one looking after my parents, then my siblings won't step into it. Or if I'm not the one in this role in the community, no one else is going to step up and do it. So how much are you willing to see the consequence play out and be in that discomfort of maybe no one else does do it, but what does it cost you if you're unrelentingly staying within that role and maybe not letting the dynamics reform around that, because there might have to be a space before there is a shift that happens, that people won't automatically step into that space, for example. But there's that feeling of, well, I'm going to immediately lose the sense that I'm approved of by people, or there's an ease in lack of conflict and everyone's doing what they're expected to do, and that just reduces the stress of my entire day for this outcome that might be still quite far down the track. So there's a suspension of the reward for that change in behavior. And that is like similar but different to fear of our own power, that the sabotage people often talk about in relation to something they really want. And so it even might be eating disorder recovery, but they end up overriding what they know they needed to do to get the results of recovery in ways they didn't expect, or it didn't feel like they consented to, didn't feel like they had an opportunity to intervene before it just happened. And before they know it, they're doing the same old thing again, and it's been happening for a few weeks, and they're meeting up with their coach or their therapist and maybe realizing that in session, or realizing that on reflection, and wondering, like, how did that just happen? How did I just go another couple of weeks in the same behavior when I promised a fortnight ago that it would change?
With the example that you used about, let's say you're a carer for your parents or grandparents, and that puts a particular strain on your ability to manage stress, perhaps your ability to eat more because you are so stressed out, or even perhaps over leaning on exercise because of the things that you're sort of dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I do wonder, with that sneakiness element of self-sabotaging behaviors, where if you were to look at that as an example, that the person living in that experience, it could be quite easy for them to have that perception that there is absolutely no one who can do this job the way I can. But it's kind of complicated because secretly you might actually know you like the busyness of being the carer, because that distracts you from eating what you want to eat, should eat, or perhaps your hunger cues, or perhaps you like being the carer because it then means you can go thrash it out at the gym. Like, there's something that sort of feeds the desire to be the only person who can do it. But as you start to be guided through this process, and I guess you almost give permission to see, why am I so focused on being the person who honors this task, that you can also start to see the deal you've got with yourself on how it feeds the way you want to live. But also perhaps it might open other pathways to other care services that you can call upon to help caring for your parents, for your grandparents. That doesn't mean you're neglecting them, but perhaps means you get an hour back, or you get 2 hours back, or perhaps you just don't have as high level of stress because you're not taking on duties that, can be really, really intense when you're caring for somebody.
That's really, really well explained. You pick up on a really important point, that it starts to challenge role identity. And if I am the carer, or I am just the one that's always there in the community, like I'll be available for canteen duty, or I'll be the one that steps in, then they can feel like a lot of obligation, but it's also, what is that role actually affording me, and how much have I over-identified with it? where it feels so uncomfortable for that to have to change. And something I think is really important to say about self-sabotage in that regard is that it truly is a protective behavior, just like most eating disorders are. The intention of most eating disorders, in my opinion, they're not these evil entities that have possessed somebody and are trying to destroy their lives. And if we could only expel them, we could go back to how things were. It's much more entwined than that. It's much more a part of us that is so afraid of not having that part work in this way, that it really believes our best chances of having a fair crack at this lifetime are to do so with those compensatory behaviours. And self-sabotage operates comparably, where maybe there is a subconscious belief, and this is the sneaky bit because it's all happening subconsciously and we're not aware of it. We're not hearing these conversations happening that are occurring behind the psychic wall, that if I go for that promotion, let's say, and I am perceived differently within the company, that I am at a higher pay grade, that I am differently positioned within my friendship circle, within my socio-economic grouping, maybe I'll be targeted. Maybe I won't be, people will think that I'm conceited and I won't be as welcome in my circles. Maybe there'll be expectations of me that I don't feel able to meet, that I don't feel able to fulfill. So actually not going for that promotion might make life more easeful, it might make it more predictable, it might be safer. And if there's one thing that human brains love, it's safety and predictability. So we might self-sabotage by climbing up in that interview, or it's even possible to do something like misschedule an important interview that we totally didn't mean to do. But there is a part of us that was aware of putting blocks in the way to making access possible if it thought the outcome of that could be dangerous for us.
Yeah, and I think that that's so important to know that about our own psyche, that I sometimes describe it to clients that often our brain can almost work like a genie in the bottle, like your wish is my command. And knowing that that wish you made might not have been last week or 2 weeks ago, it could have been a wish you made when you were 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, that's been allowed to fester and linger. And then all of a sudden you try and override something with a new goal or a new way of living. And the genie is going back to the rule you set or the wish that you made many, many years ago and going, okay, well, you just pretend you're going to do that, but I'm back here keeping you safe, right? It's all going to be okay. And the beautiful part of it is if you can almost see your brain as a genie in a bottle granting you wishes, you can start to then look back and go, well, if what's holding me back was a wish that I made, what was the wish? And try and almost be like a detective and go back to what it was that I created. Because I guess once you identify that wish, then you can go, oh, I remember thinking that. I was only 10 when I thought that. And that was because I heard so-and-so say that da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that's just not true. Or perhaps it's a completely different circumstance now, or that doesn't apply to me. And then you can almost like crack the code on that sabotaging belief, because you've gone, oh, hang on, that's not relevant anymore. It's actually really different. And I've heard many stories before when it comes to fertility. And this isn't like HA fertility, more unexplained fertility, regular periods, health checks, everything's great. But on a psychological level, where perhaps someone's had this notion, that as a young teenager, if I fell pregnant, my parents would kill me. Like it would absolutely be the death of me. Or if someone found out that I'd been intimate with someone, I'd be kicked out of my church community, or my girlfriends would think I'm some nasty words, or, the list goes on. So at some point that thought was made, you absolutely cannot fall pregnant because that would be the death of you. Let's not do that ever. And then, years later, obviously trying for a child, and they can't fall pregnant. Everything's fine, periods, hormones, egg checks, all the things you can think about. And then they start receiving therapy, and like, this is Marissa Peer's work, I'm sort of basing this off, but she'd have the conversation with them of, well, when was there a time where you couldn't fall pregnant because it would be really bad or it would be wrong? And these women would identify similar stories. It'd be the death of me, I'd get kicked out of my community, I get kicked out of home, and at the time there were very real repercussions of their actions. But as an adult, they kind of just let them go because now they want to. And whatever her process would be, she'd go through, well, what would it be like if you were to fall pregnant now? Like, would you be safe? Is everything okay? And months later, these women would fall pregnant, right? And clinically, labs wise, nothing changed. But there was this old lingering thought that, like, this would be so bad, you cannot do it. And they didn't even know it was there. So often, and then a conversation I've had with some of my women recently has just been, and it could be a helpful question, I'd love to hear your feedback on it, Jacqueline, which is, we've got this identity that we are right now, but it's really unmanageable. It's really difficult to the point where it's negatively affecting your life, your health, your fertility. There's a long list of things that's not serving you anymore. But there is an identity that you also don't want to become. And that's why you're pushing yourself on the other side of the scale so much so that you never become this version of you again, right? So let's acknowledge who this version of you is. Why can't you be them again? What behaviors were you doing? What were your thoughts? What was your life like? And really get clear on it. And then go, okay, well, if this is me now, and this is me who I never want to be again, is there actually a middle ground? Is there a way I can be safe from this past self, but also safe from my extreme lifestyle? And it's really beautiful what comes up. And like, there tends to be, hang on, there probably is a way I could do this that would protect me from the past, but not be as exhausting as the future. But I feel like you need to be fairly warmed up in the process to be able to open that, I'm going to say Pandora's box, but it's very beautiful. Pandora's box sounds like it's a crazy mystery, but it's not. It's actually a really beautiful process. But I would love to hear your feedback on that idea of, you're protecting yourself from something. So let's identify, what is it? What are you protecting yourself from? And can we find somewhere in the middle that actually serves you and saves you at the same time?
Such an important conversation. Another way of describing it might be core beliefs, and the core beliefs that if anyone's seen the Inside Out movie, it's like those core memories. Isn't that brilliant?
It's
that should
so
be
clever.
Compulsory watching. It's so clever. The way that core memories and core beliefs are set up, which could, like, another example might be that you witnessed your parents in a really combative relationship, and you were told, or you observed, that maybe men weren't safe, or relationships, you'll always get hurt, like, just protect yourself, never give too much away. And just like you were saying, as you get older and developmentally progress, you might have hope that you could have a partner, and you might be in love with someone, you might want to be connected with them, but something like that could also create a pattern of sabotaging relationships, or it's almost like testing behavior starts to play out. Or, what if I do this, will you leave me? What if I said that? Well, how would you react? Until eventually it probably does cause some sort of reaction, and then it feels like it's the evidence to the already predetermined,
confirms the story,
confirms the belief.
Even though you sort of like set out to make it happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's something, like, as painful as that outcome is, there's something at the same time that's incredibly comforting about reality confirming our worldview. And so if we believed that we'd probably get hurt, and we do get hurt, there can be a great sense, again, largely subconsciously, but a great sense of, yep, I knew it. See, there you go. You were right. That's what's going to happen. Yeah,
never do it again.
Don't do it again. Versus finding someone that challenges the notion you had set up, which on one hand would feel wonderful, but also is very confusing, because that's not what you expected from the world, and that's not what you were told the world would bring. There's also within that, the self-sabotage being a protector, sometimes what I see, which gets really interesting, is that we don't always know what we really want. And if we haven't done as much work, and or as in work on ourselves, therapy, self-reflective work that is supported by another person, and we're lean towards perfectionism, we lean towards being high achieving, we could also take on that tick box list of what's expected of us, get married, have a baby, have this kind of work or career, or do this or don't do that, and start pursuing those goals without really knowing whether they're for us. Sabotage can be a way of protecting us from what we don't actually really want. So Elizabeth Gilbert writes about it in Eat, Pray, Love, which many listeners might have read that book. She was pursuing getting pregnant in her first marriage, which actually wasn't the right marriage for her. And would the pregnancy test would come back negative and she would be devastated. But she subsequently realized that she really didn't want to have a baby. She didn't want to be a mother. And perhaps her body was protecting her. Perhaps there was a realization on a level that she wasn't aware of, that she didn't actually want to be with this man, and she didn't want to create that life and anchor herself to him. It can play out in so many different ways, which is really fascinating. But I think along with those questions you raised, I would ask, am I sure I really want what I think I want? And what would be the cost? Like, even if the answer is a big yes, what would be the cost of getting it? Because there is always a cost. If we get promoted, we're working more hours, have more responsibility, that's taking something away from us elsewhere in our life. Even falling pregnant might be what we want more than anything in the world, but it is going to mean changes to our lives. It is going to mean losses. There's going to be a grieving process to other things we currently have. So those conversations with ourselves or with a coach or therapist can be really powerful. I work a lot with using the language of different parts of ourselves, and you brought that into like what your 10-year-old self believed, your 5-year-old self believed. I like to question, what's your earliest memory of this feeling? Because often we travel back in time to, oh, I remember being at school, being at primary school, hearing about something or seeing something and making this decision about it for myself, or just becoming scared of it or feeling this way about it, which I'm now feeling at 30 or 40 or 50 years old. But probably we're feeling it in the way that we first felt it, and that's gotten stuck on repeat, rather than it just being a feeling that we're having again in a different context. So our capacity to respond is leveraged to the developmental space we were in when we first had that experience. So if something got stuck, like a belief or an assumption, a risk that we downloaded, say at 10 years old, just because we're now 35 doesn't mean we have the capacity of a 35-year-old to think about it, which we assume that we do. And I hear that all the time. People say, well, that was so long ago. Well, now I'm an adult, of course I don't think that anymore, but we're just more complicated than we realize. We actually do. We actually do think about many things in the way that a child would speak about it or think about it, or our capacity to respond to particular situations is quite childlike. And that is true for everyone on earth. There's no shame in that. We're all like living within a range of capacity and developmental awareness and ability that will come in and out of in different situations in our days. But to realize that there might be a 5-year-old mindset or a 10-year-old mindset actually taking the wheel in your life, and that could be what we would call self-sabotage as well. That the moment that maybe someone was having an argument with their partner and they got really triggered and they said something really awful that a part of them knew had the potential to end the relationship, and their conscious self is so regretful about that and thinking, why did I do that? Like, I shouldn't have mentioned that thing. I shouldn't have brought that up. Why did I get angry and do it? Maybe I've stuffed it all up now. the version of them that said those words probably wasn't the version of them that was at work earlier that day, or that took a phone call about something administrative earlier that morning. It was a part of them that was incomplete and unfinished and unrecognized and got really scared and popped up and has probably popped back away so that we can't see where it is, and the behavior is very confusing in that way. But it's a very helpful framework to understand these departures from our overriding understanding of who we are.
Just because when you describe the moments that sort of pop up, the first time you felt this emotion, the first time you experienced feeling a particular way, do you find when you're having these conversations with clients that when you bring up a particular emotional or feeling that of experience, that it's quite easy to recall because it's a substantial memory? Because as you explain that, my brain kind of jumped to personal experience, like the first time I felt really vulnerable, I exposed, belittled, but then also the first time I felt celebrated, the first time I felt like I'd really succeeded at something, or proud, right? Because I feel like the first time you actually feel pride is a really, really strong moment, because you kind of need a little bit more emotional fitness, let's say, to really know what pride is. Before that's just like, yay, and then you kind of let it go. But when I think of like key emotions, whether they be positive or negative, if I go back to the first time, it's actually really easy. Like, I think I probably thought of 5 things when you said just that one sentence. Do you find that when you're talking to clients, that if you ask those questions, they can kind of pinpoint it relatively quickly versus going, oh God, I really don't know. That was such a long time ago. Is it pretty snappy?
It's a really good question. I would say both play out, and often there'll be particular states that we find really hard to place. Like maybe you can find something around self-worth or something around embarrassment, but you can't find grief. And that could be for various reasons. Of the way in which it showed up for the first time, how conscious you were. It's possible that the first time we felt something, we were pre-verbal. Even in utero, there's research to show that we download some of these things for the first time before even earthside. So we probably can't remember that, but we've got a really vague sense of, I don't know, but it was somewhere, it was something important, but I can't put my finger on it. We don't have autobiographical memory before the age of 2.5 to 3 years old. So most listeners wouldn't be able to describe a memory happening to them. We do have emotional memory. So we do, there is an awareness in the brain of emotions being felt and remembering those emotions, but not this happened to me as Jacqueline, and I was sitting here and I was wearing this and they said this to me and I felt this way. That's not usually retrievable before about the age 2.5 to 3 years old. So sometimes that can be harder to find. For people with complex trauma, significant trauma, there can be memory loss. There can be anyone that presently has depression that can impact memory. So it can make it really hard to find the details, but there might be a vague sense of, it was somewhere in primary school, or it was somewhere, like, I know it was something around when I was in this group at high school, like something, it's connected with something in there, but I can't find the particular time. Interestingly, another thing that I think is interesting that impacts memory is boredom. So sometimes it's trauma, but sometimes it's also periods of times that were quite lackluster. Like if you were just in a stretch of your career or school, your childhood was not traumatic, but quite bland. Often there's not a lot that's retrievable because the brain remembers high impact experiences.
Almost like highlight, yeah.
Exactly. There's no highlight reel to recall. It won't just remember the day-to-day kind of in-between states. And if most of it was that, there might be years and years of not really much going into the memory banks. So all of those things can impact how easily we find it. And also, I think what you said earlier about being warmed up, maybe being familiar with this way of thinking. It is quite common that when someone starts a process like therapy, they find it hard to recall, but maybe a few years later, they're all over it. They're retrieving memories. They can go back to other places. And I mean, we could do a whole episode on memory because it's a very fascinating topic. But
I feel it coming up. Let's
oh,
go.
I think it's going to happen.
I'm already excited. I've got so many questions.
But it's really, it's absolutely phenomenal, and there's a lot we still don't understand about it. But experts on memory say that we actually don't forget anything. So when we say, I remember something, it's sort of a shorthand for I can make contact with details that I can recollect. But actually, it's all there somewhere, which is why if you do feel like, oh, I can't remember the details, or I don't know when I had this feeling, it is possible for it to come through later. And certain life experiences like pregnancy, also like dementia, fascinatingly enough, can actually bring up memories that we didn't think we had.
I actually had a first-hand experience of that yesterday. And then, so as you were explaining all of that again, I thought, gee, I wonder if I have really quick recall to these things, because I've done years of trying to heal my thoughts, which meant exploring, well, where did they all come from? So I've retraced all those pathways. So now it's like, oh, I know sort of the route to every direction that I need to go in.
You've got a really well-developed GPS system.
Yeah, that's right. So it's like I searched for them, but perhaps they weren't there when I started. I doubt they would have been, because you kind of like practice going, well, where was it? I feel like they're almost that detective side kicking in. But just what you said about that, like we remember everything. I guess it's practicing retracing where they're located in the mind, or perhaps pulling the right thread, let's say, that links you to the memory you're trying to find. And it happened yesterday. I was at lunch with my brother-in-law and his fiance and my husband and Kasima, and we were talking about our standout movies when we were children, like those movies you watched on repeat. And I said, oh, I'm pretty sure like Land Before Time and Aristocats, they were my favorites. And then my brother-in-law was like, oh, Page Master. And I'm like, Page Master? Oh, which one's that? I'm like, is that the flying books? He goes, yeah. And I'm like, the kid who turns into the cartoon? He goes, yeah. I'm like, oh my God, I watched that like no other movie. It was my absolute favorite. I think I drove my mum and dad crazy with it. But unless he had have said the title, I had absolutely no idea that movie existed. And quite possibly, even if I saw a picture like in a magazine or something or driving by, it wouldn't have been enough to actually trigger it, because I looked at the little video cover. How old am I? And even then I'm like, oh yeah, there was one little character at the bottom. I'm like, yes, that's the one. But I was just mind blown, because I thought I learned something a long time ago, that your brain holds everything, but it's the pathways you retrace the most that sort of grab. And it was like that memory is actually so strong, but I've never revisited it. It took somebody else to sort of take me there before it clicked. And just how incredibly powerful our minds are, because if you think about that example, it's like, well, how many memories are just sitting there, but we're just not quite sure what word to use, what thread to pull, what visual cue, I guess smell's a very strong one though, isn't it? When people smell certain things, it can slingshot them back to all kinds of memories.
Absolutely, yes. The olfactory nerve is near essentially where our memory bank is, so that tends to trigger a lot of memory. It's so fascinating that you had that experience, and I think you're right about when you've driven around a town a lot, even if you don't know exactly where something is, it's like where to go to find it. Yes, and that street leads to that street, and it's kind of near that park and that church on the corner, and you can find your way there, versus just never having been in that area before and it being brand new terrain is very true. And it's good to come back to why willpower just isn't adequate, because we slamming on top of all this complexity, you've just got to get up and try harder and not do it again, will never be sufficient, because the powerhouse that is all of this information, it's like a data bank. It's like the internet, and you're trying to stop certain information being on there, or you're trying to create a filter that will contain it. It's just not possible. And more a willingness to bring all parts of us with us as we seek to make change, and a curiosity as to what the interrupting behaviors are, are likely to get us so much further, because it just gives permission for those parts to show up. And the goal is integration, so that if we can at least get these different sides of ourselves in communication and talking to each other, we can absolutely pursue change. But when we deny that they exist, or we just want to cut them off because it's going to be so much quicker to just do it without them, we tend to run up against a wall and find ourselves in repeat behaviours.
As you describe that in my head, I'm like, it's more sort of like steering the ship against the waves versus trying to take the ship out of water. Because it's like we just can't take it out. We've got to keep sailing. Now, I feel like we've chewed through time so quickly. We have maxed out our time today, but before we finish, could you share with our listeners the Architecture of Wings that you have got starting up very soon?
I would love to, Jade. The Architecture of Wings is very dear to my heart. It's a 7-week program that I run for people recovering from an eating disorder at any stage, including later stages where behavior might be fairly well progressed, but there's gaps to fill in terms of feeling fully engaged in life and connected to purpose and passion, and feeling fully equipped to move forward with immunity to relapse and being able to reach out towards all that life has to offer. We actually talk a lot about the themes that have come up today in parts work and relationship between the parts of ourselves that might end up otherwise holding us back or stunting us in certain ways. We focus a lot on somatic inclusion as well, so that we're trying to really bring the body with us and help people develop things like intuitive eating, with improving their felt sense of their bodily experience, and a lot of narrative therapy interwoven into all of that. So in a way of working with language and working with ourselves that is beautifully provided through the platform of narrative therapy.
I've been following along on all the updates, and I feel so excited about it. If anyone is interested in joining the program or wants more information or just wants to dive straight in, where's the best way for them to get information?
You can either reach me directly at jacqueline@wingsandquill.com, my email, or come and have a look at some of the information about the Architecture of Wings that's on my Instagram page, which is wings_and_quill, or our website, www.wingsandquill.com. Any of those avenues, just reach out and we can talk more about whether this is the right fit for you at this time.
Amazing. And ladies, I encourage you so much to at least research this wonderful workshop, as you would be in the safest, most empathetic, caring hands possible. But Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining us today. As always, it's been such a wonderful chat. I'm definitely noting down memory as our podcast discussion next time, because I'm very excited about that one. But for now, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a beautiful day.
You too, Jade. Thank you so much.